It starts with a dream, fueled by discipline, powered by resilience. Welcome to Marathon to Medicine, your front row seat to a race like no other. Hey everyone, welcome to Marathon to Medicine. My name is Sydney. Let's go over today's Jack Westin's CARS passage. So just in case you are new here, the first step to my CARS technique is to always preview the question. So make sure you highlight any words in the question stem that might be in the passage. So anytime a question stem mentions a particular name, that would most likely be found in the passage. Also, for question 3, if you see something like the passage suggests that merit pay for teachers is, that means that if it suggests that merit pay, then merit pay would most likely be talked about in the passage. So that's why I would highlight merit pay and teachers. And then for questions 4, 5, and 6, it's pretty self-explanatory. Question 4, I would definitely highlight individualized merit pay. Let's see. Question 5, I would definitely highlight principles since it says the passage implies that principles will definitely be talked about in the passage. And for the last one, question 6, it says, which of the following, if true, most weakens the author's argument about approaches to improving teaching? The only thing that I would highlight is improving teaching because it's something that the author might talk about. So now this is my favorite part, attacking the passage. I love this part because we get to cross out any information that's just too much. So for me personally, I can't read the passage in its entirety, and I don't think anyone should, or else you'll lose time. So one thing that I've gotten really good at is skimming the passage super quickly, skimming at least a paragraph at a time super quickly, and crossing out whatever I don't need using the strike through tool at the top left corner. So now going through the first paragraph, this is the introductory paragraph. So one thing for sure is that you should definitely be reading the first and last sentence in its entirety. I think this is just a good and helpful test-taking strategy in general. I've always been taught that introductory paragraphs, the first sentence and the last sentence are super important. Now, when it comes to crossing out information, I always cross out information that I just don't need. And you might be asking, oh man, how do I how do I find the information that I don't need? First things first, if you did not highlight a concept in the question stem, most likely you're not going to need it for the answers. So you're just going to cross that out in the passage. Number 2, I usually cross out any extra examples because most likely there's a claim before the examples. So I keep the claim and then the examples are usually coming after to support that claim. So I just keep the claim, remove the examples. So now for the first paragraph, it says one of the bitterest controversies. So I crossed out bitterest because it's just too much. Like, I understand that it's a controversy. Like, it's just, bitterest is just too much. So it says one of the controversies in today's school reform debate is merit pay. And then after that, they define merit pay as rewarding teachers not for seniority and the number of ed school credits they've piled up, as public schools have done since the early 1920s, but for what they actually achieve in the classroom. Now, I don't know if you're like me, but this is just too many words. So after it says merit pay, rewarding teachers, after that, you don't need any of that. Just because it's just saying what merit pay is not. But what you actually need is the part where it says merit pay for what they actually achieve in the classroom. So they're paying teachers according to what they actually achieve in the classroom. That's what you need. And then that middle part, it's basically talking about how there are some teachers in New York that oppose this idea of merit pay. I'm going to keep that just because it's the first example that popped up. So I just usually like to keep the very first example. As for everything else that comes after, where it says we don't have reliable means to measure a teacher's classroom performance, the union's charge, so merit plans will inevitably result in supervisor bias and favoritism. I think the only thing I would have kept was supervisor bias and favoritism and associated with merit pay. But other than that, that is it. I just think that all this information is not necessary. So then I just summarized paragraph 1 to say, what is merit pay and this is merit pay controversy. So now, once we get to the second paragraph, I'm going to say that you don't need the entire first sentence. Where it says, missing from the argument though are lessons, all of this you just don't need. It's giving you specific dates, it's giving you a specific example. You don't need it. You didn't highlight it in your question stem, so you don't need it. So now the sentence after where it says to get a sense of what merit pay could do, I kept it because it actually talks about merit pay in the American industry, and this analogy I feel like it might be pretty useful when we get to the questions. But when it gets to in the early 1900s, blah, 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 US corporations, we don't need any of that. It's giving us a specific date, it's giving us specific examples. We don't need it. The only thing we have to know is that merit pay has benefits on the American industry. So now, let's go to paragraph 3. So, what I will say about any paragraph is that if it starts off with a huge claim like this, where the author's personal opinion comes out, I would definitely highlight it. So, where it says one major benefit of merit systems, I would definitely keep that. But then after that, it says that's the overriding rationale behind Iowa's new incentive program. The reason why we don't need that is because the claim was already in the first sentence. It says one major benefit of merit systems is that they enable schools to pay teachers bigger salaries. And it looks like this is what Iowa is doing. And then we want to make sure we highlight John Forsyth because this was someone we highlighted in our question stem. After that, we don't really need to know anything about him. We just need to know actually what he agreed with, which is he was actually part of Iowa. So he definitely agreed with giving teachers merit pay. But after that, with all the quotes that they give us, we don't need any of it. So I'm going to end up crossing a lot of it out. So after reading the third paragraph, I ended up summarizing it as unlike New York, Iowa actually believes in merit pay, which is paying teachers more for better performance. Now, for the next paragraph, because it's so small, usually with small paragraphs, I actually just end up reading a majority of it and just summarizing it. I didn't really cross anything out of this paragraph just because I'm like, you know what, I could understand enough. Let me just write a summary. So I ended up just summarizing it as Iowa is more flexible than New York and LA, and that's the only thing you need to know. It looks like their unions are a lot more flexible than New York and LA, so that's what I wanted to point out, just in case there's a question on this type of relationship. And then with the very last paragraph, I highlighted useless, I highlighted principles. I really want to make sure I highlight things where the author's tone comes out. And then principles, we highlighted that in our question stem, so I wanted to make sure I highlighted that when it came to the passage. And then when it comes to super strong words like eliminate, where I highlighted, I usually like to highlight this just because, again, it shows the author's opinion, it shows the author's tone. I just like to keep track of that. So after reading this last paragraph, I summarized it to say that merit pay benefits teachers and administration when it comes to principals. Okay, and so let's come up with the main idea. So my main idea, since it was talking a lot about teachers, it was talking about merit pay, it was talking about salary, all of these things, I summarized the passage to say that merit pay is just beneficial for everyone because this was actually the author's opinion too. The author had such strong opinions about it. Says that merit pay will like eliminate certain things. Like there are such strong words he uses that I have to include that in my main idea. So that's why I said merit pay is beneficial for everyone, and I think that's concise enough to answer the questions with. Okay, so now starting with question number 6, it says, which of the following, if true, most weakens the author's argument about approaches to improving teaching? So typically when it says the author's argument, I always go back to the main idea, which is that merit pay is more beneficial for everyone. So whichever answer contradicts this is going to be our answer because it says most weakens. So it actually can't be A because this really didn't have to do with our main idea. B, I like B because it says there's an inverse relationship between teacher performance and teacher pay. This would actually contradict the main idea saying that teacher pay should increase with teacher performance instead of vice versa, instead of it being an inverse relationship. And all the other answer choices I just didn't like because it didn't match up our main idea. And then so it ended up being B, which was correct. All right, so now when it comes to question 5, it says the passage implies that principals are at their best when they. Now, in the very last paragraph, it talked about how principals tended to not fail their teachers. It actually says that New York principals fail less than 1% of all teachers. And then it follows up with New York hopes to get principals to crack down on bad teaching by rewarding them with pay. And so this answer has nothing to do with anything but they need to increase the amount of teachers that they fail so that they can get more money, which lines up with answer C. Now, with question 4, it says, given the passage discussion of individualized merit pay, which of the following achievements would be most reasonably considered a factor in making a teacher eligible for a merit pay increase? Now, without the proper techniques, this question to me is hard. But this is why I always say to note the author's tone, because it says right here, without individualized merit pay, teacher evaluations will remain useless. That word useless is so strong, so we should definitely highlight it. But based off of that, this means that peer teacher evaluations are very important to individualized merit pay. It literally said that in the passage. And it came with that strong word useless. So, because of that, that's why I picked the answer choice C, good peer teacher evaluations. All right, so going to question 3, it says the passage suggests that merit pay for teachers is considered suspect by some because it. Now, think of the people who actually oppose merit pay. Those are the people from New York and LA, but specifically from New York, they were actually saying that, oh man, like there's so much favoritism going on, which leads to the conclusion that they think that it's not a reliable way to measure. And the only answer that lines up with that is B. Okay, now for question number 2, again, we saw John Forsyth. We're going to go back to the paragraph where it actually talks about John Forsyth and Iowa. Now, again, Forsyth was with Iowa, and Iowa said that they pay teachers based on performance. Good teachers equal higher pay, which is why C would be your best answer choice. That's the only answer choice you should be picking for question number 2, because that's the only one that deals with teachers needing to be paid higher so that they can keep them. Okay, and for question number 1, we're going to go back to paragraph 2. And the only thing we need to know about paragraph 2 was that merit pay benefits the American industry, which is American businesses, which is why D, the only one dealing with businesses, should be your answer choice. And then after that, we got 100. So yeah, I hope this helped everybody. Happy cars.